evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Environmental Commission. Dr. Stultz, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Commissioner Graham?
Here.
Commissioner Hutton? Here. Commissioner Chair Needham?
Here.
Councilmember Smith? Commissioner Slavic?
Here.
Commissioner Mursky?
Present.
Commissioner Apple?
Here.
Commissioner Gibb Randall? Here. Councilmember Bannister?
She was here.
Yeah, I know she was here.
She's here.
All right. Commissioner Calvert?
Yes. Here.
Commissioner Brown? Commissioner Skinner? Oh, Commissioner Brown. Chair, you have a quorum.
Terrific. In our efforts to go paperless, you do not have an agenda directly in front of you, but it is posted on Legistar. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Here.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The agenda is approved. Our next order of business is public commentary. Are there any members of the public here who would like to address the commission? Nobody? Okay, there will be another opportunity at the very end of the meeting if anyone would care to. We have no unfinished business, but our first item of new business is a presentation from City Administrator Howard Lazarus on FY 2020 budget for sustainability issues. Thanks for coming, Mr. Lazarus.
Thank you. Will you bear with me for a moment while I prove the theory that random button pushing is far more effective than an organized approach to technology.
Thank you.
There we go. Once again, superstition and happenstance has overcome science in getting us to where we need to be. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you this evening. We are about to embark upon that biennial or every other year process of putting together a 2-year financial plan. As we started last year, the approach is to go back to boards and commissions and get input. There are a couple differences between last year and this year. One is we are approaching a full budget cycle. The other is that we are actually approaching this budget cycle most likely in a better financial position than we've been in a while. So it gives us the opportunity for a couple of reasons to look more broadly, to reestablish some of the programs that we'd like to see that reemphasize climate change, that reemphasize our environmental role, and help to reestablish us in that expression our friends down the street use as being leaders and best in the field. So I think there's a lot to be excited about. We were doing this earlier, so the bad news is you won't see a lot of numbers. The good news is that there is a chance for meaningful discussion about what you would like to see us do, what kind of goals and objectives you'd like for us to set as we approach the 2-year planning cycle. The other really big thing that's different between last year and this year is the presence of your staff liaison, Dr. Missy Stultz, who is now over our Sustainability and Innovations Office, which really did not exist last year other than a figment of many of our imaginations, but is now something very real. I'd also like to thank Missy for her preparing these slides, so we can either give her great credit for insight or I can blame her as I stumble through them. Oh, there we go. So, that's either magic or Missy has the presser. So tonight I do want to talk about just an overview of the financial planning process, where we are in the budget, and then get your thoughts and share some thinking. So it's an opportunity for creative interaction to really address the things that are important that we'd like to get done. Oh, swipe it. Oh, there we go. So when we look at the budget process, we're in that time frame now where we're reviewing our financial projections, and we've sat with council on a couple of occasions to establish some strategic direction and priorities. One of our goals this year is to have council look at outcomes and talk about a strategic plan for the city. They've given us some very valuable input as to what they'd like to see, and then our challenge is to put the resources in the right place to get us there. Over the next couple of months, February and March, we have a series of work sessions with council to go through each part of the budget in detail. Public services, those agencies that draw from the general fund, our community services efforts, as well as the other agencies that are part of the city's budgets, and that would include the county's Office of Community Economic Development, Housing Commission, and others. When we get into April, I will present the formal budget to council, and that is, again, is our 2-year plan. Council will deliberate with all seriousness, and in May, they will debate the budget and hopefully adopt it. And then, as we know, the fiscal year starts July 1st. Oops. Wrong way. Is there a,
Well, this is fun. All right, bear with us.
no, we're right there.
This is fun. Let's try this.
Oh, there we go. So when we talk about the budget, and I apologize for the delay, the truth is that, you see, about 40% of the city's property is off the tax rolls, and property taxes are the primary means that we have for financing most city operations, exclusive of those that are enterprise, water, sewer, and some of those. The truth is that the city is the largest landowner of property that's not taxable, and that really is attributable to parkland. The city doesn't have a lot of large facilities, so most of what takes up our holdings is parkland. Behind that is the university and then the public school system. So it's really about 20, 10, and 10. In spite of that, we will see a growth of property taxes in the coming year, greater than we've seen in past, mostly due to a higher rate of inflation. So that's the basis of where the revenue comes from. You can see we're really dealing with a total budget of just under $400 million. What's interesting about that is the general fund is only about a quarter of the total, but it seems to get the most attention as we talk about budget. And that's because where a lot of the services people expect come from: police, fire, some of the environmental programs are funded there, some of our parks are funded from there. It is the area where council has the most discretion in how they obligate funds. On the revenue side, you can see from the general fund, public safety take up about 51% of the total expenditures. That's actually very good cost control compared to other municipalities where, in some cases, over 80% of the general fund dollars go to police and fire. So we are very fortunate to be able to fund a healthy and robust set of services from our general fund. Some of the constraints, and I think this is where the discussion really starts with us, is our environmental concerns are addressed through multiple funding sources. Some of it comes from the water fund, some of it comes from the general fund, some comes from other sources. So in that regard, it's really more important at this point to think in terms of outcomes, metrics, and a policy agenda rather than focusing on specific funding. We did meet yesterday with Council's Policy Agenda Committee and did incorporate that input you gave into the policy objectives for the coming year. That's important, one, because it helps us guide our search for grants and other sources of funding, but it also helps us look to both Lansing and Washington on those things we need help from our elected delegations to change statutes, to change laws that allow us to proceed on the path we want to choose to be environmentally responsible. As it's stated here, the general fund is the most competitive fund because it has the most discretion. And Missy's shop, the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, works within the funds listed there. So it is a smorgasbord of where things come from, but it also is a testament to the fact that our environmental agenda affects everything we do. Some ongoing issues of concern, certainly on water quality. We have PFAS and the related compounds. I think that's a really, and Brian will talk about that in a little, but it's primarily a good news story because we know what we know and we can take action. We're in a better place than those who don't know what they should know in terms of contaminants that exist. There is a process ongoing to address PFAS, which is still below the advisory levels that EPA have set, and we feel confident we'll be able to meet future regulatory requirements, which are many, many times lower. 1,4-dioxane and the Gelman plume continues to be a concern. We do not have any 1,4-dioxane either in the source water now or in our treated water. Brian will hopefully talk a little bit about the plans we have to have increased diligence in our monitoring as well. We are looking down the road at the water treatment plant design and construction with the idea not only that we can treat what we know now, but what we can reasonably anticipate in the future and those things that are unknown to us. I've shared this with Brian and Craig Upey many times that when Craig and I were starting off in the world as engineers, we were looking at treatment levels at the parts per million range. Now we're talking about parts per trillion for things we didn't know existed. That's 1 million times more protective, and we can detect things that we didn't know were there before. So that's a good news story. Our goal is always to provide a safe and reliable source of water, and the process which we started with council's approval of a progressive design build approach at their last meeting gets us on our way. There's been concern about sanitary sewer discharges, and with some of the increases in the sewer rates, we'll be able to start doing more preventive maintenance on our sewers. And then there's the ongoing discussion about rate structure, particularly on the water rates. In the area of resource reduction, recovery, recycling, and reuse, there are several issues. We are talking about solid waste regionalization. We are going through the solid waste resource management plan, which will guide our investment in the coming years. There is a lot of concern about the status of our recycling operations and the desire to make sure that it meshes with the solid waste resource management plan. We do want to extend organics collection on a full year basis, but also address the operations in the downtown, which because of the nature of business is heavily, does produce a lot of food waste in an organic matter. We also want to be more responsive to the concerns of downtown merchants. And then we want to make sure over the long term that the fund is balanced, but we also want to start the discussion about how do we go to potentially as a pay-as-you-throw policy for council to adopt, if that's something that they want to do, if that's something that is desirable for our community, so that people are properly incented to reduce the amount that they consume in packaging and other things that may eventually wind up in the landfill. So those are some really meaty discussions to have, things that we certainly seek your input on as well. Some of the priorities that Missy has put together for her office, we are looking at building resilience hubs in the neighborhoods, whether it's part of a new fire station or if it's a standalone structure, part of a rec center. But we do want to be prepared in case of emergencies, and we want to do it in a way that's equitable. We are going to be more engaging with our community. Missy has taken up the Sustaining Ann Arbor Together program, which is really the microgrants program that was in the Climate Action program. There's some exciting things going on, some good news that'll be coming out of that as well. She's embarked upon a listening tour to get the input directly from our community as well. Energy is probably one of the areas where there are more exciting things in the works than anywhere else. We're looking at net zero energy for affordable housing and for fire stations. There was a commitment of $200,000 to the Housing Commission so that when they redo the Broadway apartments, that they can be more energy efficient, lowering the burden financially on the occupants, but also being the responsible thing to do. We are part of the AARP Aging in Place initiative to see how we can help seniors stay in their homes longer. We are committed to achieving council goals for carbon neutrality. I think Missy has arranged for us to get a Chevy Bolt for us to test drive as a way to convert our fleet further to renewable sources. That will also require us to put in some charging stations. Charging stations are included in the DDA project for addition to the Ann and Ashley garage as well. So we're excited about that. And then there are some things that may not quite be ready for prime time that address solar energy. We have reached out to our legislative delegation about reintroducing the measures that will change the tax treatment of residential solar. They were both passed with overwhelming majorities in the Senate and the House last year, but outgoing Governor Snyder, for some reason, vetoed them. I think there's a lot of support for that, and it shouldn't be a very heavy lift in the legislature this year. And then with Mr. Mirsky's help and others, we are going to do a better job of being transparent and tracking what we do, updating our dashboard, not only for Missy's operation, but throughout the city, and report on those things that help us answer the question that the community would ask is, how can we tell you're doing a good job? How are you being prudent with our tax dollars? So you'll see that come out as part of the budgeting process as well. So that's kind of what's in the hopper. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to you and to the distinguished Dr. Stoltz to lead the discussion of what is it that you'd like us to address in the two-year financial plan, and respond to any questions you may have.
Anyone on the commission have questions? Mr. Lazarus?
Thank you for that overview, Mr. Lazarus. I'm wondering if you could provide some update on the county millage rebate and the implications, plans for that, and implications for this work.
Sure. There, as you know, last July, the council adopted a statement, or actually 2 Julys ago, that they would go 40% to affordable housing, 40% to climate action, 20% to pedestrian safety. This past year, we did program out the 20% for pedestrian safety to do primarily variable speed limit signs at schools. And we're going to continue to use that money for pedestrian safety along with some other funds. There's been some use of about $200,000 or so from the Housing Commission to pay for some of its operating costs. One thing that will come to council soon is there'll also be some assistance to the commission to get over the hump, because they've had some financial challenges, or may have some financial challenges due to the slowdown in federal funding. But there is funding that will accrue for affordable housing to about 25% will go towards operations, 75% will go into the Affordable Housing Fund, so they have the money to build additional units in the future. And then the 40% that was allocated to climate change, as I said, there was $200,000 set aside to assist the Housing Commission for energy efficiency. That's where we are now. Council is debating what they want to do in the future. They've directed us to go out to the community with a survey. Those survey questions have been reviewed and are going through further review, both with council and some folks at the university, to make sure the questions are free from bias. It should go out within the next week or so. We'll get the data back in time to make budget decisions in March. So that's where it is. We're gonna, it's sort of a little bit of a circular process. We're gonna treat those funds for now as non-recurring. We're gonna start programming things that are one-time or limited time occurrences until we get some certainty as to the direction council is going to give us on how to use those funds.
Other questions?
I just had a follow-up, if that's okay. Regarding the survey, is that something that can be shared with the commission?
The questions I think we can, I mean, the questions we can post when they're finalized, I think that's a reasonable ask.
Finalized,
This
not
is
for
a,
input.
if you remember, we had an open survey, if you will, that we got over 2,000 responses to early in the budget process, and that was posted online. This survey is a closed survey to make sure we get representation throughout the community, so it won't be posted online for response. It's very similar in nature to the National Citizen Survey we do. Same firm is doing it, so it'll be mailed out directly to residents. When it comes back, it'll be sorted and adjusted to reflect the demographics of the city. So you won't have a chance to respond to the questions, but I think we can make them available once they're finalized.
Once they're finalized, not for input, though.
I think the process has gone kind of down the road, and because of the people who have reviewed it, and council has the opportunity to, we want to make sure that the questions are unbiased. Not that you are biased, but from biased in the sense that you don't ask leading questions. So because of that approach, and because we want to make sure that what we get back is statistically significant and free of bias, we've gone down the path we have.
Mr. Administrator, how is your view of road repairs evolving?
Great question. We are committed, I've committed that we're going to find some additional road funds for the coming year. I've also talked to council about committing some additional funding for pedestrian safety, crosswalk improvements, and lighting improvements. So we do have some one-time funding this year that we can dedicate to pedestrian improvements for the coming year. When we talked to council in December, there was more than a bit of dismay at the decrease in funding level. Part of that is because over the last couple of years, we had some big capital projects that had grant money. I think if you're going to keep your eye on something, keep your eye on the improvements that we're doing with capital preventive maintenance, and as we do next year, the follow-up survey on asset condition to see that we're making progress towards the goal of 80% of our roads in good or better shape by 2025. So council has expressed their dismay. We're going to try and find additional sources of funds. And I think the capital preventive maintenance we did on South Main, on Huron Parkway, you'll see more of those because they extend the life of the pavement further. But it is a priority for council, and we're going to put as much funding towards that as we can. It's not about potholes either. It is about road condition. You know, potholes, I think, are a euphemism for other things. We have to look and see what the governor's going to do, the new governor, with her plan to fix the roads. And one thing that would be really interesting is to have a discussion of what fixing the roads really means. Is it just pavement condition, or is it safe use by all users of all abilities? And that's a good conversation to have.
Howard?
Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming. I have a question about the survey, about the millage survey. Is this going to be a phone survey or a written survey?
It's a written survey.
Okay, and will there be sufficient background information provided
Yes.
for the questions?
It's a really delicate dance in that you don't want to bias the survey, but there's enough background there so that we can explain what we're asking for without leading the respondent to an answer.
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that the basic facts were given as part of the survey, you know, in terms of what money was spent already and what the background was, the history.
I think there's sufficient background to explain what the intent of the survey is. I haven't drafted the questions. Mr. Crawford's worked, the CFO, with the firm to develop them to make sure that they're consistent with council's desires and that they are unbiased.
Thank you also for taking part of your evening to appear in front of us this evening. I've got two sort of general questions. First of all, you started with the fact that 40% of property in Ann Arbor is off the tax rolls. Do you have a rough idea how that compares against, let's say, the national average, or maybe more specifically against peer cities?
Well, we're a university town, so
Right.
I think it's probably pretty common in university cities. I think what makes us unique is the amount of land we have dedicated to parkland. And we have a commitment that everyone will live within a reasonable walk of a park, quarter mile or so, 20 minutes or less. That you don't find, well, you find that as a goal in some places, you don't find the commitment to follow through. So I think that does make us a bit unique.
I would be interested in knowing what a benchmark figure is.
Sure.
You know, some university towns are obviously larger, like, say, Madison. Others are very comparable, say Boulder. It'd be interesting to know how we stack up against them.
I think we can do that.
The other general question I have is, I think for all of us better understand when we talk about priorities and spending, question that I have is, well, let me start. My understanding is that because expenses are generally been increasing faster than revenue, that in, at least relative to the general fund, we're talking about a zero-sum game. So if we say we want more spending for X, then it's going to take money away from Y. Is that generally true within the general fund?
That's generally true.
Okay. So one of the questions that I have in that regard is, how is the administration and council looking specifically at outcomes and relative to its goals in defining what its spending should be? For example, in looking at your presentation ahead of time, I saw, as you pointed out, that safety services are roughly 50% of the city's spending. And I looked online, there's a website called City Rating, and I assume they pull data from the public domain. And I looked just at serious crime. And for example, property crime in Ann Arbor is down roughly 45% since 1999. We're well below the national average, like 30% below the national average, also below the Michigan average. Violent crime is down roughly 30% from the same time frame, and we're maybe a third of the national average, at least according to this site. So the question that I would have is, you know, take crime, property crime, serious crime, take whatever you have. How does council look at those outcomes and determine priorities based on objective measures and not just from what I saw from the materials that were posted for the work session, looking at the citizen survey and using that to drive priorities?
So if we want to focus on public safety, or in general, most of our general fund costs are labor. And while we have increased some staff positions over the last couple of years, it really hasn't been that significant. So we have kept our workforce fairly stable. We are a much leaner organization than most, if not all, of our peer cities. So I think that's a benefit to us. We've negotiated fair contracts with our unions, particularly public safety, and to the credit of our firefighters and police officers, they have been good and willing partners in striking fair deals with us. We have changed the nature of our pension plan to long-term limit our liability. We do still have some short-term concerns. We have seen benefits from our wellness program, where our exposure rates for medically related accidents are much, much lower and have resulted in some rebates to the city. On the public safety side, which is the majority of the general fund, our police department also is pretty lean. The average number of officers per 1,000 residents for a comparable city is somewhere around 1.7. We're at 1.05. When you throw in the university police, it brings it up about 1.1. So our police have to use data to assign resources. And I think they've done that very, very well. We are also very good at getting reimbursement for big events that occur. On the fire side, we just did a firehouse location study, and we can cover almost the entire, well over 80% of the city within the 4-minute response time. That's the NFPA standard, and the entire city in 6 minutes. That's fairly remarkable. As a result, you've seen reductions in fire-related losses on property, and we haven't had a fire-related death in many, many years. There's a problem that's kind of correlation, not causation, but it's hard to go between those two. On the non-public safety side, I think we've done a good job of leveraging OPM, other people's money. We've been very focused on the things that we want to do, and we've been very careful in the assignment of resources. Getting back to fire real quick, and I want to give Chief Kennedy some shout outs. We worked together to reduce the general fund burden for fire inspections. That saved us $500,000 a year in general fund money. And Mike worked on our assignment of fleet vehicles for fire, and that saved us another $250,000 a year in general fund money. So we're continuing to do those kind of improvements as well. The long-term goal is to balance the rate of cost growth with the rate of revenue growth so that we don't have a structural imbalance in the budget. And as we do that over time with some prudent and neighborhood-sensitive economic development, I think we can grow the revenue to where we can bring on some of the additional programs. But the short-term goal is to eliminate that structural deficit that's built in where, our revenues have been going up by 1% to 1.5% and our costs by over 2%. I think we can balance that out. And I think we've got there this year. It may be a one-year anomaly, you don't know, but part of it is prudent development and leveraging a property that we have.
I guess what I'm driving at is, I'll flip it so it could be either way.
Yeah.
That if we're meeting our targets or even overachieving the targets in some area, then maybe we don't increase the rate of spending as much in that area or even freeze it or cut it back and use that for other emerging priorities. And that could be, taking the example that I said, if, for example, these were, the crime rates were exceeding our targets, then maybe we don't grow the safety services budget as much, and we use that for water improvement or potholes or whatever. It could be the other way around. If we are overachieving our goals, let's say in greenhouse gas reductions, then maybe we should not put as much money there and use that for something else. It could go either way. But it really be driven by outcomes in defining our spending priorities as opposed to just looking at the NCS or whatever the National Citizen Survey or other more subjective measures.
So again, the general fund is where council has the most flexibility in assigning funds. I think we've taken steps and will continue to take steps to use the data that we have to assign resources appropriately. We are going to do an enhanced job of reporting on metrics and putting those metrics in context so that each year when we do, every other year when we do the budget plan, we can marry those up to what we get back from citizen surveys and really come up with a strong plan. Things like doing capital preventive maintenance over the long term will decrease the amount of money we have to spend on road repairs. As an example, it generally costs about $50,000 per lane mile to do a preventive maintenance treatment. It can cost upwards of over $500,000 a lane mile to do major rehabilitation. So by putting money out on a consistent basis, we can extend the life of those assets. One of the things council did last year is they adopted an asset management approach where we are starting to put funds away for the capital reinvestment we have to make in our facilities, our parks as well. Our budget doesn't respond well to perturbations, big ups and down. So if we have an incident where the air conditioning goes out on this building, we should have funds set aside to address that and not have to pull money from somewhere else. So I think we're doing all the right things to become more resilient as an organization and keep our fixed costs down so that we can make those decisions based on the needs of the community year to year.
In the case of all the dedicated funds, have we now pretty well eliminated the structural deficit problems in them? Water, sewer, storm, these are all now very healthy?
Well, Stormwater Fund, as you know, a couple of years ago had a pretty significant percentage-wise, not really cost-wise, increase in the rate. That's allowed us to reinstitute a cyclic maintenance plan for our urban forest, as an example. And I think the stormwater side will be in good shape. There was an increase in sewer rates that council approved on second reading on Tuesday. That increase will allow us to make sure that we don't run afoul of our debt service coverage on the debt from the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. But hopefully will also allow us to start doing preventive maintenance on our sanitary sewer system. And then on the water side, the big thing that's out there is we need to upgrade the plant. That's what's going to drive rates. So on the enterprise funds, they are in better shape because they can address their needs through adjustments of rates. On the general fund, we get into restrictions the states impose through, Headley and Prop A on the growth of rates. And by the way, I think we all are concerned about the impact of rising taxes on people's ability to stay in their homes and keep their homes affordable. So there is a positive side to that. So from a policy standpoint, we want to address at the state level to have some more flexibility. Some of the things that will be in the policy agenda are things like perhaps ticket taxes on big events that occur in town that aren't directly related to university operations. That may be something, and I've shared that with some folks at the university. There are some ways to better leverage the monies we get. Through some capital investment, we can reduce our operating costs for energy by taking facilities off of DTE power maybe and using more renewable sources as well. So I think on the enterprise side, we're in good shape. We have the ability to put money aside for the needs that we have. I do have a concern that's a little bit more forward-looking, that as more and more vehicles do use battery power, if you will, our road work through Act 51 is funded by gas taxes. If we're a little bit at odds with ourselves by trying to get more money for roads, but at the same time trying to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are used. That's a long-term problem from a policy perspective we're going to have to address. And it may be that we wind up with a fee that's based on miles driven. That's going to require some collaboration at the state and the federal level. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. The question is, yeah, we're okay on the enterprise operations. We're working on the general fund.
So I have one other question, which I doubt a lot of people understand, but you probably can illuminate it very well. We've been building a lot of very tall buildings in the city, which have very likely a significantly higher tax income to the city than a four-story building would have. Is this really helping our tax income? Is it balancing out? I mean, is there really a genuine financial value to the city to have these tall buildings?
So what you can build on your property is based on the zoning. So if there are things that are zoned D1 where you can go up 180 feet, you can do that. I think clearly, revenue is value of the property times the millage rate. So the higher value of the property, the more tax revenue that we'll get, the schools will get, the county will get, the libraries will get. So if you build a big building that has a lot of units that are rated, well, you'll get more money out of it. I'll go back to one of my favorite quotations, which is, I think, Oscar Wilde quotation, that a cynic is a person who knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing. We need to address community values as we look at development. The goal is not to, what's the goal we have? Is it to optimize revenues to the city, or is it to optimize quality of life? And that is why you have some very esteemed, knowledgeable, educated, and dedicated public servants as your council to debate that policy issue.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a word of encouragement to my other commissioners. The administrator, I think, knows my priorities, but I think it'd be interesting, since it says here you would like to know our priorities. No one's spoken up yet with environmental or general sustainability spending priorities. I think
Well,
that was
thanks
the
for
main
the
reason
segue.
why
I think Dr. Stoltz is
Administrator
going to.
Lazarus came.
Right, so hiding off to the side. We have in February a session where we're going to do agenda planning for the next year and priority setting for this commission, but we also have an opportunity to share with Administrator Lazarus your priorities right now. So we want you to share your priorities. I'm going to jot them down, and then we are going to carry them over to our work planning session next month. So John, would you like to lead? What are your priorities, maybe?
Everybody knows mine, so I'd encourage others to speak.
No, I love your leadership.
Well, I'll toss a few out. Certainly, finding a way to get a functional MRF here, whether that's regional or city-owned or what it looks like, but making that happen as soon as possible would certainly be one of mine. And as you had on one of your slides, expanding organics year-round and throughout the downtown is another big one of mine.
I'm very thrilled to see Dr. Stoltz begin to talk about a community outreach program that works with neighborhoods on a number of channels: energy, stormwater retention. Called out in 2004 was in the city's natural features master plan and outreach program to educate and encourage and work with people to teach them what natural features they have in their neighborhood and how to steward them better. And I'm genuinely hopeful that the outreach program that she builds includes that component. A lot of talk on this table about toxics and energy, but a big oak tree sequesters more carbon than many other things that we might be able to do. And if we have a whole lot of oak trees, including a whole lot of young ones in this city, we'll be doing a very fine thing for the climate. I hope so.
I'm interested in making more investments toward equity, pairing equity and energy together. I like the things that are happening with the solar power. I like the idea of electrifying housing units. I'd be interested in looking at an electric car sharing program like Los Angeles has done. I think all of those things are really worthwhile.
Thank you.
I'd like to add on what Bob said, and really more than just an operating MRF, but really looking at Ann Arbor as being a leader in waste management. I think we all like to reflect on the fact that 20 years ago we were, but the fact is that we're not now. And hopefully through this process of regionalization that will happen. But like I say, that idea of being able to be something that we can all be proud of as a city is certainly something that has intangible values, but values nonetheless.
Have you had the opportunity to participate in the stakeholder group for the solid waste resource management plan? There's some really interesting numbers in there that on one hand would say that we're actually as a community doing very well in some areas. We have on a apples-to-apples comparison basis, we actually have a pretty high diversion rate, and it's remained constant. And the cost of, achieving that diversion rate for us is a lot lower than it is in some of our peer cities. And that does not take into account the fact that we have a bottle law here that keeps some of what would normally be a recyclable out of the waste stream. The issues with the MRF have been, the community to a certain extent has been very patient about how long it's taking us to retool it, but the market's different than it was 20 years ago. You know, there's less paper, the markets are different, particularly over the last year with the international sales of materials being basically cratering. Having said that, we do need to have a facility that allows us to have more direct contact and lesser travel distance with those materials re-entering the manufacturing stream. And I think there's some opportunities to do that as well. But long term, really, part of it is looking at how do we reduce consumption. And that ties to Ms. Hutton's concern about equity, about having people have greater access to fresh and nutritious food with less packaging. So there are a lot of things as a community we're going to have to make some decisions about. A aggressive pay-as-you-throw approach is something that will provide further stimulus for people to reduce the amount of things that they throw out. You know, recycling, like other utilities, is at odds with itself financially because as you conserve and consume less of a commodity, the actual organization providing it has lower revenues. So as we try and reduce the amount that people throw away, we wind up on a pay-as-you-throw basis with less revenue. So we have to solve that conundrum as well. But I really hope over the coming year to get the MRF off center stage as the feature that people are focused on and really talk about how we can be what we say we are and live our values going into the future.
Very interesting.
Two things with water. One is understanding what really can be done about the dioxin, and I'm hopeful and about hearing more tonight about it. It just feels like this sort of impending doom scenario that a lot of people that I talk to feel like we don't have a lot of control over in terms of how it's moving, what we know about it. It just seems to be changing, like people predict, and then it changes. And what really are our options in terms of dealing with it when it hits Barton Pond, you know, which is 80% of our drinking water. So I would like to understand that more and really see what the potential strategies could be for us to be able to deal with it. So that's one piece. And the other is I'm thrilled to see this sheet that has all these Allen Creek projects and what's coming. And I work on this in my own professional life too, but I walk by West Park every day, and probably every other day I smell a strong smell of gasoline coming out of the grate. And I know the city knows about this, but it just reminds me all the time that despite all the good work that has been going on with stormwater in that creek, that there's still a long way to go. And that I think we have some big incentive with the development that will be coming along the Broadway Bridge, because they hope to be able to have some areas where people can access the water with that. And that is directly downstream of where that comes out, and as opposed to the Cascade, which is just upstream of where that comes out. So I am hoping that we can start to drill down on some of those last remaining pieces of point pollution that are coming in there, so that we can feel okay about putting our feet in the water where it comes out a couple of 100 feet, where it finally hits daylight again. So those are my two priorities.
Well, thank you. To be honest, it's a consideration that hasn't arisen in any other conversation. So I appreciate you bringing that up as something that we need to address.
I share the concerns about the MRF and about solid waste management. But I also have a concern about the tree line versus the greenway options. To me, the tree line seems over-engineered in a sense, because the true benefit, I would think, for many citizens have told me that the true benefit would be opening up green space, you know, especially as the downtown development, as the high-rises go up, you know, you need to provide more of the natural features or more of a natural pathway to, for example, West Park. So instead of building it all the way, you know, so connecting downtown to the river and to West Park, I would hope would be rethought as a priority for a greenway, rather than continuing that development over basically sidewalks and a cityscape for several blocks to the south.
Thank you.
Yeah, two thoughts. One, a general one. I just want to reiterate support for the sustainability plan that was introduced last fall and unanimously supported by the Environmental and Energy Commissions, and that we continue through our funding discussions to think about that as a plan and not just look at particular parts of that, but that we approach this as a plan. The other issue, just a question that always bothers me as we think more about electric vehicles, and that hopefully as that expands, we're thinking about what is the energy source for those vehicles. If it's coal-fired electricity, we're not really gaining anything.
Without getting too far ahead of ourselves, we do have some inspirational plans to increase the availability of renewable sources of energy for city operations.
Wonderful.
And I think as those things develop, they'll, you know, not to be secretive, but some things just aren't ready for prime time yet as we get through them.
Any other thoughts? Thanks very much, Mr.
Again, I appreciate both the questions, the input, and the relationship that we have, as well as your dedication to serving the community. I wish more of you would have had the opportunity to come out Saturday for the recognition event for our boards and commissions, but I can tell you now that we've taken the first step, we'll do it again. So thank you for your service to the city.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Next up, Brian Stieglitz is here from the city to give us a presentation on PFAS contamination, and also, I think, address dioxane issues as well. Welcome, Ron.
Well, thank you for the invitation to come talk to you. I think Missy's going to help me out. I'm hoping I'm a little more successful in this than
Howard said swipe up.
swipe up.
Yeah, that's the
Okay,
clue we
that's the
learned.
trick.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, I got it. So I'm here to talk to you about a few things tonight. A majority of this talk, or parts of it, came from a presentation that I did for City Council on September 17th on updating them on emerging issues related to water quality primarily. So PFAS was one of them. We also talked about a couple other items. But tonight I'm going to focus primarily on PFAS, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are on what I can share about 1,4-dioxane, and then I'll have some opportunities to answer some questions if you have any. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, because I think most of you are probably familiar with this topic a little bit on what are PFAS. There's been a lot in MLive and in the news, and the media has been following this pretty rigorously over the past probably a couple years now. But these are per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're used in a lot of products that we use every day. Some pictures on the slide, whether it's a Teflon pan, fabric softeners, food wrappers, dental floss, things that we're coming into contact with regularly. Firefighting foam is also another major source of PFAS. They're very stable, these chemicals. They do not break down. They have a very long half-life in the environment. In our bodies don't break them down, which is why they can have health impacts at such low concentrations. And there are many thousands of these chemicals that are being used every day, and new ones are being introduced into our environment and our watersheds. We currently have analytical techniques to test for only 24 of them, and that is what we are currently doing. So how do PFAS impact public health? We have a fair bit of data now on 2 of these chemicals. One is, the acronym is PFOS, and the other is PFOA. And those are the ones you probably heard most about. Ingestion is the primary route of exposure from a health standpoint. So you can get it on your skin. Doesn't really have an impact. I'll talk a little bit more about that with some of the river contact issues. It is bioaccumulative, which is one of the issues with why there's a do not eat fish advisory on here in the river, because it's accumulative in the fish species that are in the river. Identified here are some health impacts. Cholesterol, it could infect your immune system, increase in cancer risk. So there's sort of an assortment of things that PFAS how they can impact your health. We have some data on some other ones. Recently, there's been some health information that's come out on Gen X, which is a proprietary brand of PFAS. PFBS is another one. So every day we're learning more and more about these chemicals, and more information is getting out into the public environment. So it's quite a dynamic space that we're working in related to these chemicals. How are they regulated? So currently they're not regulated in drinking water in Michigan. They are regulated from a cleanup standard, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. The EPA has a health advisory level for these. When you add the 2 chemicals that I've talked about, PFOA and PFOS together, the health advisory, and this is a lifetime health advisory, so it's not an acute. It's if you're drinking a certain amount of water, you're 2 liters of water every day for 70 years, you're more at risk for having the health impacts that I talked about on the previous slide if you're exposed to more than 70 parts per trillion, or nanograms per liter, of a combination of those 2 chemicals. So that has been in effect since 2017. There also recently, in December of 2018, the governor pulled together a science advisory board, and they just came out with a report related to PFAS in Michigan, and it has indicated, and there's a lot of literature indicates currently, that 70 is probably not the right number, and it probably should be lower. So that's something that we're also trying to understand and get our grip around here in Michigan and in Ann Arbor. There's a report that came out by this Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease that indicates maybe more like 7 and 11 are appropriate numbers, targets that we should shoot for those 2 compounds. Currently, in Michigan, there is a proposal in the legislature to regulate these 2 at 5 and 5. So 5 parts per trillion for PFAS and 5 parts per trillion for PFOA. So we're following that and tracking that and seeing if that's going to have get support. So we talked a little bit about drinking water. The source of this is our surface water. So we obviously tested all of our drinking water sources, well and river, and fortunately our well water does not have PFAS in it, but the river does. The wastewater that comes from our wastewater plant does, primarily because it's coming from the drinking water. The fish, I've already mentioned that, and I'll talk a little bit more about Do Not Eat Fish Advisory and firefighting foam. Fortunately, we've had some great conversations with Chief Kennedy, and Ann Arbor has already gone to fluorine-free firefighting foam. So we've disposed of all the firefighting foam that contained PFAS that they had in stock, and now they're using fluorine-free. And Chief Kennedy has also been an advocate with some of his peers. So we think that's a really positive step because we want to make sure that people are aware of this issue and can prevent these chemicals from getting into our watershed. So in Ann Arbor, we've been monitoring these for several years now. We are currently, the slide says currently monitoring monthly, but at the direction from the city administrator, we are now monitoring bi-monthly. So twice a month, we're getting samples of our source water and our finished water. And we're also posting all of that information on our website so our customers can see if they have questions about what the water quality is. The maximum detection was several years ago. In 2018 and 2017, we've typically been below 10 for the combination of these two chemicals in the drinking water. But recently, in the end of 2018, there was a spike in the river that got a little bit of press, and our finished water levels were above that, probably be somewhere between 10 and 20 parts per trillion. We're using granular activated carbon at the plant, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that currently is the best available technology for municipal drinking water treatment to address these chemicals. So we're fortunate to have that available to us and be using that at the water treatment plant to address this. In 2017, we looked at an alternate granular activated carbon material. Not all granular activated carbon are created equally, and the manufacturer who we were using had identified one that has been effective at removing PFOS and PFOA. So we decided to pilot that in a couple of our filters. We worked with the MDEQ to get permission to make some changes. And over the course of several, about 6 to 9 months, we found that this was very effective at bringing our PFOS and PFOA levels down to non-detectable levels. So staff recommended to City Council at the end of 2018 to implement this in all of our filters, and they had the foresight to allow us to make that investment, and they approved the financing in order to make that happen. And we're in the process of implementing that currently. So we've done about a third of our capacity. We have 26 filters. We've done a third of them. We're going to be doing the balance of our filters in the spring, over the next several months. So then we will have now this media in all of our filters. So we think that's a really positive step. In addition, we're participating in research that's going on. Right now, we're going to be part of some work with North Carolina State as part of a Water Research Foundation grant to look at what types of technologies can be effective at removing the shorter chain PFAS compounds. So those are the ones where that granular activated carbon is not as effective at removing. So it's something that we're also excited to be part of. If you look at the timeline, how we got to where we are today, it started really in 2009 when there was a provisional health advisory, and you can see the levels were in the hundreds of nanograms per liter. Since then, there's been a lot of research done. There were some provisional surface water criteria identified in Michigan in 2010. Wordsmith Air Force Base did a fish study in 2012, and they found very high concentrations of these chemicals in fish. You can see the numbers are in the tens of thousands of parts per billion. So this is not parts per trillion, but 1,000 times greater. So quite high levels. Again, they bioaccumulate. And then in 2013 is when the surface water criteria were put in place. And those are currently regulatory. Those are the regulatory levels that currently exist in Michigan. So 11 nanograms per liter if you're discharging into a water supply that is a drinking water source, which the Huron River is considered, and 12 if you are discharging into a non-drinking water surface water supply. The Lifetime Health Advisory was in 2017. I sort of talked about that already. MPART was formed in 2017 also. MPART is Michigan's PFAS Action Response Team. And there's a lot of great things that they've been involved with in trying to coordinate a lot of state government activities together under one hat to address this issue. I'll talk in the next slide a little bit about what some of the data that they've generated come up with. And then in 2018 is when the drinking water criteria were established by MDEQ. Again, it's not regulated, it's guidance, but they're asking utilities to attempt to achieve this less than 70 nanograms per liter in their drinking water for these two compounds. So what this slide illustrates is some of the results of the MPARTS work. So they took the initiative to test all drinking water supplies, community drinking water supplies and schools in the state of Michigan. No other state has done that, has been taken such an aggressive approach to address PFAS. And there were 3 buckets that that the results ended up in. And so we're one of the participants. There's almost 1,400 community water supplies in the state, and 2 of them had concentrations of PFAS. 1 community water supply and 1 school greater than 70. The community water supply was Parchment, if you heard about them, and now they're connected to the Kalamazoo system, so they are not part of their own self-sufficient water system anymore, so that, to some degree, problem has been addressed. We're in this middle bucket of this 10 to 70, and we're in there with about 45 of our peers, maybe 30 community water supplies or just under, who have in this range of 10 to 70 parts per trillion of PFAS and PFOA in their drinking water. So now transitioning to talk a little bit about the river and what we're seeing from the fish standpoint. The MDEQ uses this 300 parts per billion as a trigger for PFAS to issue a do not eat fish advisory. So you can see there are several samples along the watershed. Kent Lake, Baseline Lake, Argo Pond all have fish. Baseline Lake is really close, but above basically 300 parts per billion. That's the reason why when these analytical results were analyzed by the state is why they indicated that this stretch of the Huron had a do not eat fish advisory.
I have a real quick question.
Sure.
Those are parts per billion before we were talking about parts per
That's
trillion.
correct. That's correct. So for fish and consumption, it's 300 parts per billion. This chart shows, and it's sort of difficult to see maybe for the viewers, but the red dots, the big red dots are the higher concentration. And you can see along the Huron River stretch up towards Milford, there's a couple big red dots. So those are quite high concentrations of PFOS, PFOS, in the Huron River. And the next slide will zoom in on that a little bit. So we have some results that are, over 5,000 nanograms per liter. Remember, we're talking about, at the drinking water side, single digits. So it's several orders of magnitude higher. So we've, based on these results in July 2018, we see, well, there's obviously some source here. And DEQ has been pretty aggressive in researching what this is. There's a creek that enters the Huron River there. It's called Norton Creek. And the Wixom wastewater treatment plant discharges into that creek. And they found that Wixom wastewater treatment plant was a significant source of PFAS. And the source to the Wixom wastewater treatment plant is a company called Tribar. They're a metals manufacturer, and they use these chemicals as part of their process. So there's been a fair bit of aggressive work that's been happening since this was found out. Tribar has put in granular activated carbon treatment at one of their plants that's discharging into the Wixom wastewater treatment plant, and that's been effective at removing these long chain, the PFOS and the PFOA, just like it's effective at our treatment plant, it's effective for them. But we're continuing to work with the MDEQ to determine if there's other sources in this area, and also our concern about the other PFAS, because we know that even though the health impacts haven't really been identified yet, and we're concerned about any of these chemicals getting into our watershed. So we're aggressively working with MDEQ to help address that issue, help us address that issue. I guess one last thing about foam. PFAS like to enter the state of foam, and we have a lot of dams on the river. They're surfactants, so they get in foam, they concentrate. We had collected some data on what the levels of the PFAS were in the foam, and it's in the thousands of parts per trillion. So high, and at that, so once we had that data available to ourselves, we shared that. And we have a do not eat foam advisories. Not that many people are going down to the river to eat the foam, but we told them it's probably wise to avoid that. Also contact with pets and things like that, because the concentrations are elevated in the foam. And that's pretty common, and that's something that we've seen around the state at a lot of other facilities. So that is my quick PFAS update. If anyone has any questions, or I can move right on to 1,4-dioxane, yep.
Yeah, I have some questions. First one is there a plan, I think MPART originally planned to test some private wells, drinking water wells that were near the river. Is that ongoing as well?
I don't know about their plans to test private wells.
Okay.
We can investigate whether that's the case. And
Yeah, I don't imagine any city residents have private wells. Is that true?
that is true.
Okay. And how about, I know in Europe at least, there's many countries have programs where wastewater treatment plant sludge and water releases are being tested. Do you know if the state has any plans to do that in the future?
Yeah, our wastewater plant has been sampling, so that's trailing a little bit on the drinking water side, but biosolids is another place that they're looking at, does PFAS concentrate.
Yeah.
So they're starting to collect the analytical data on that currently.
Oh, good. Oh, thanks. And one other question is, I know MPART had plans to examine manufacturing sites that might be releasing, some 150 or so manufacturing sites statewide. So they were saying they would release that data by the end of January, last I heard. Do you have an update on that?
I don't have an update on that.
You don't?
But
Okay. And then just one last question.
Okay.
Sorry. And that is, as you know, with these shorter chain PFAS compounds, it's very expensive to use these LCM, SMS methods to test for each individual compound. So many countries in Europe are using another assay that's really very cheap just to flag for any organic fluorine compounds. It's called Combustion Ion Chromatography. So it can be, I think it can be piggybacked on top of regular fluoride analysis. So I was wondering if there were any plans to use that as kind of a backup testing, even though they're not regulated right now. You could start getting some baseline data for the presence of the shorter chain compounds or other things that aren't being measured out of that, I think it's EPA 537 method.
So right now, our analytical work that we're doing is compliant with what the EPA approved method is, so we're using that. I'm not familiar with the technique that but we can clearly investigate what might be available to us. As part of the research that we're participating in with North Carolina State, they are looking at new analytical techniques, and they may be similar to what you're describing, to do it faster. And right now, the turnaround time of us getting results can be 3 to 4 weeks. So we're not really getting timely information. So there's a lot of challenges with what the current analytical capabilities are.
Yeah, this is technically a much easier and cheaper assay, so I could send you the scientific references for
Okay,
those.
yeah, please do. Thank you.
Yeah. This is a clarifying question, I think. The DEQ and MPART and your group are doing the sampling?
So we are doing sampling of our source water and finished water twice a month. And that's the city of Ann Arbor at the city of Ann Arbor's expense.
City, okay.
The state, the Huron River is waters of the state. So DEQ, in partnership with MPART, it's the DEQ. MPART is just an umbrella for several state agencies. They are doing the analytical testing along the stretches of the Huron.
On the surface
So
water.
all of the data that I just shared on upstream, Norton Creek, Milford, Wixom, that's all MDEQ sampled.
And the fish,
And their analytical
and
testing.
the tissue sampling?
And the tissue sampling is also by the state, correct?
And our source water is Barton Pond, or what is actually our source water?
Our source water is Barton Pond.
Yeah.
I'd like to piggyback on Commissioner Brown's comments. So I knew that toxins are regulated much more tightly in Europe under REACH than they are under TSCA in the US. So I did a little bit of research and looked at what's going on in Europe. And I worked for a European company, so I thought, well, look somewhere else in the world. And I'm wondering if we're doing that here locally, both at 2 levels. in terms of addressing root causes, and secondly, in terms of treatment. And in terms of root cause, I mean, the root cause basically is that industry, as you said, fire departments are still using this chemical. And what I was at least able to see in the public domain is that in Europe, both PFOS and PFO are both banned, where for PFO, it won't be enforced until 2020, but essentially the ban is in place. So one of the things that I would encourage the city to do is to take a position with the state through resolution or through our lobbying efforts to say, let's not just keep on putting Band-Aids on this, but let's do what the Europeans did, and that is get rid of these chemicals out of the environment. I mean, that's something that you personally can't do, but we have council people here, and it seems to me that's something that we really should be doing. Otherwise, we're going to be talking about this because, as you said, these are persistent chemicals and they're bioaccumulative. So, you know, we're going to be dealing with these things for a long time, and the sooner that we really address the root cause, the better off I think we're going to be. And you should verify what I said, but that's what I could tell. The other thing is, from a treatment perspective, I'm wondering what other highly developed countries in the world are doing in terms of treatment. And I'm guessing that the better companies that are providing these treatments know what's going on internationally, but that might be worthwhile checking to see you know, what kind of technologies they're using. I think Steve mentioned that there seem to be some other promising technologies out there. You know, what are they doing in Japan? What are they doing in Europe? I mean, these are highly industrialized countries. They have gotten rid of these, and they obviously must be treating them somehow too. And I would only suggest that we possibly look in those two directions. And I don't have any answers. I just would propose those as potentially alternative ways of approaching the problem.
Okay.
I had a question about the communications on that. I'm really glad we're monitoring it bi-monthly now and putting that up on the website. And I know we have those little signs out by the river saying, you know, don't eat the fish. But are there any plans to put our bi-monthly report up digitally by the river, like at the canoe liveries?
We have not had that conversation. So
Okay.
it's something that we could consider.
Real quickly, Shannon and I and people from the Huron River Watershed Council are going to be meeting with city staff about signage, about watershed health, and putting out some information about what is the health of our watershed and what actions people can take, and potentially we could include that kind of information in that information, and it could be updated then regularly. So we'll be meeting, I think, the end of the month.
If I could add, Brian has asked about getting some additional dedicated support to help in messaging. I think hopefully he's convinced you that technically we're at the leading edge, but communicating in this environment can be a challenge because you want to be transparent and open, but you don't want to incite public panic. I don't think we can count on the media to help us in that regard. So I'm going to take the encouragement from Ms. Bannister. We're going to provide that support and do it in a way that is honest, but also doesn't lead
Provides
towards
broader context too.
It's trust in government these days is not at its highest, and we want to make sure that we do things in a way that inspires trust and confidence and lets people know that we are protective and we are delivering a safe and reliable source of water.
I just have a comment about contextualizing. I mean, it seems to me that one of the things that might be useful to residents is knowing that these are so ubiquitous that even when you're testing, you can't use certain sunscreens and you can't use certain, toothpaste. I mean, this is everywhere. And so even when we see these things and they're alarming, contextually, in everything that we encounter every day, it's not significant or it's not super significant. And that knowing that, I think, would be really useful. I don't think people have that sense. And my second question is, if the city's having any reaction to the state having passed the bill that raises the cleanup rate, is there any action that the city can take to try to counter that?
I'm not really prepared to discuss that tonight. I think we're still trying to understand what that means and how that impacts all of the things that we're involved in. So I just don't think we have answers yet, but
Fair enough.
it's on our radar for sure.
Got it.
Thank you, Jonathan. No?
Yeah.
No. On to dioxin.
Okay, the next fun topic.
Thank you for that.
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer all of your questions on this topic, but I'm going to do my best, and maybe we can come back if appropriate to hopefully answer the questions that I'm not able to answer. But I provided an update to the administrator, which he shared with council at the end of last quarter, and my intention is to move forward with quarterly updates on the progress, and the few slides here are extracted from that last update. So bear with me, it's just some statistics, but in terms of the monitoring of water supply wells, so these are people who are using water for drinking water. And this is not in Ann Arbor proper, mostly in Scioto Township. But 67 wells were sampled in the last quarter. No wells had detectable levels above the 7.2, which is the current cleanup standard that DEQ is using. 2 wells had detectable levels. They were in the 1 to 2 parts per billion, and they were on the south side near Elizabeth Road, where 14 and 94 intersect. So Gelman has a plant. They're extracting water, around the clock. It extracts about 470 gallons per minute of contaminated groundwater. It's pumped to their facility where they have treatment, and they use ozone and hydrogen peroxide to remove the dioxane. So there's low concentration still in the effluent, but probably in the single-digit range. During the May to September period of 2018, they treated over 81 million gallons and removed 282 pounds of 1,4-dioxane from the plume. This is a picture of the limits of a couple things I guess I'll point out if you haven't been familiar with looking at that. In the upper left-hand corner of the slide, all of those dots, those are all private wells. So people who are still using on their private wells, and there is no evidence yet of contamination at those locations. That red sort of line that goes around, that's the prohibition zone, so that's the no, we're not extracting any groundwater in that area because, and that's legally identified by the courts as this area is prohibited from groundwater extraction. You'll see a lot of circles in there that have sort of a white and black symbol, and those are monitoring wells. So you can see there's a lot of monitoring wells within the zone where Gelman is extracting data, and we're collecting data to identify the limits and how this plume is migrating. The plume is moving, I think, as you're all aware, towards the Huron River. You can see it sort of moving towards the east. And the different colors, you'll see sort of the beigeish, yellowish color is the 1 part per billion contour, and then inside of that is the 85 parts per billion contour. So it gets concentrated, obviously, as you go further towards the source. This is something that we're tracking as the data comes in regularly, many times. I think they're sampling some of these quarterly, some of it maybe more frequently than that. But we're looking at the data, we're watching the migration of the plume. Clearly, from the city of Ann Arbor's interest, we're concerned, as Commissioner Gibb Randall mentioned, about our water supply. So we're looking, is there any migration northward towards Barton Pond of this plume? So that's clearly, the city is very interested in watching that and monitoring that. So that's sort of an overall picture. Some additional sampling that's happened in the recent future, in the last quarter. There's been a sort of a renewed or a new attention towards shallow groundwater and surface water. So there was a fair bit of testing, analytical testing that went on. In 16 sites with groundwater within 20 feet of the surface were tested. 2 sites had detectable levels, but they were below EPA's regional screening level of 4.6 parts per billion. Also, 18 surface water locations were sampled. 8 out of the 18 showed detectable levels of dioxane between 2.1 and 19. The 19 is in Allen Creek Drain. So what's happening next? Well, the state and the county are working together And they're putting together a sampling plan. Really, the state is doing that with involvement from the county to do some additional analytical testing at some of these locations. So that's coming up in the next quarter or in the next 3 to 6 months. They're working on that plan currently. So there's additional testing that will help maybe identify what the source of this is, or and add some more clarity to this data. So I don't have a lot more to share because I don't think we have enough data to really understand this part of the situation yet. Obviously, you're all aware that the city is involved in litigation, so I'm not at liberty to talk about much more about what the city's role is and how that's all progressing. But depending upon what additional questions you have, we may need to consult with the city attorney at a future time about what we're able to share with the commission and what we can't. That's my update on Gelman.
Questions on?
I have a couple. One is that I remember early on, they said, oh, it's so deep, it's never going to get close to the surface. So what is your just current understanding of, I mean, glaciation happened, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on under the ground we cannot predict. So, but given that the data is showing otherwise of what, people told us 15 years ago, what is our current understanding of how it's just moving in ways that we didn't think would happen?
I don't have an answer for that question. I think we're wondering the same thing, and we're going to be looking at the data, and we're going to be looking at the new sample data, and we'll be consulting with some of our consulting experts and try to get a handle on that so we can share with this group and others what our interpretation is. But I don't think that there's consensus on that issue yet.
Then my other question, and this relates to my role on Planning Commission too, is there was quite a bit of controversy with some developments in town on the west side that are fairly close to the original Gelman site. And it's in relation to how we're dealing with stormwater infiltration with the Gelman plume. And we ended up passing the project, but it became very clear that there are lots and lots of projects that are in this plume of higher concentration, and I don't know that we necessarily know what the implications of all of that mean, and it'd be really tough to think, oh, we're just not going to do any stormwater infiltration anymore because of this issue. But and you're not going to be able to answer this now, but I guess I'm just putting it out there that this is we've kind of been moving in this certain direction of stormwater infiltration for a long time, and this is kind of a game changer if suddenly we have to think about that we could be accelerating a problem. And so I just want to, I guess, comment that this is something that we really need to start to put some attention to, because this has been a massive effort for our area, and I think we've been leading this in a lot of ways in terms of how we're handling stormwater and sustainable water management, and it kind of kills me to think that we may be creating a problem with that too. So, I don't know, maybe this is even a shout out to the university to start thinking about research around this issue or something, because, we have all kinds of stormwater infiltration areas in the plume, in the concentrated part of the plume.
We've talked a little bit about it. I was at the commission meeting when that conversation was brought up, and I listened to the conversation around that, and I agree we need to be prepared to be able to discuss that and address that issue. At the time, DEQ's, their expert was here, and he addressed it, and his position is that it's not an influential on migrating the plume or accelerating the movement of the plume. But, that was his professional opinion, and clearly there were others who didn't agree with that in the room. So I think we need to do some work in that area, for sure.
Yeah. And then another just quick thing, and this is just my own understanding, skin contact versus ingestion in terms of dioxane. What's the story on that? You gave us some information on that with the Pfs chemicals, but what is the story on dioxane? I know that the regional screening level incorporates
ingestion, dermal contact, and inhalation. So that's all captured in terms of that regional screening level. But in terms of how it's weighted across the different areas, I don't know the answer to
Okay.
that.
Okay. All righty, thank you.
Other questions?
In terms of removal rates, is that a standard rate of removal that's been happening at the Gelman site? and
Yes.
Over time?
Yes, it's been pretty stagnant at that level, or that's been the constant level.
Anything else? Thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next item of business is solid waste regionalization. Theo Egermont from Washington County, I believe, is here.
Nice job with the name, yes, nailed it. Well, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be presenting on the regional authority that will be forming over the next couple months. I've got Commissioner Pratt and our legal attorney, Bob Davis, who's also here tonight. The authority is pronounced WARMA. That's the name. So I want to give you a little bit of a history of where this proposed authority is coming from. The county last year gathered stakeholders together to discuss issues surrounding recycling and what was going on in their communities. Out of that stakeholder engagement process, one of the recommendations that came from that was an authority to be used as a tool to address some of those issues that people were discussing. So an authority is a legal entity formed by 2 or more municipalities in order to manage solid waste, or actually the enabling law also allows for a dog pound, but we're going the solid waste route. Interesting fact for you. And the authority is, once it's formed, the members who are part of that authority form the vision, form the priorities, and they take it where they want to go. So this authority can move as fast as the member authorities want to take it. In gathering members from 8 different communities on the eastern and central part of the county, those members made it clear that this authority will be focused on recycling and long-term look to approach zero waste. So echoing some of Howard's comments tonight, that's the long-term vision. The priorities, first steps that the members talked about were really addressing metrics. Let's look at what we've got. Let's try to get the divertible material out of the trash and move that to more appropriate streams. In order to do that, we're going to need a pretty serious engagement, outreach activities, focus on education, and that's really where we want to put a lot of our first efforts. That was very clear from members. Let's start with education and outreach. We need to clean up our recycling, increase the quantity and quality of those, and then we've got a more marketable product. So we want to clean the stream, and through that, once we've got our quantity and quality up, then we can attract local processing. So that's something that everyone said we want to do. We want to get to the point where we've got a marketable product, we can attract a private hauler or private processing to be in this area. Also, people are interested in drop-off stations. We've got a need. We did a study that looks at, we have some opportunities to collaborate around, let's make it convenient for people to drop off hard to get rid of things, TVs, oil, antifreeze, those type of products. So we need to, through our education and outreach, produce clear and consistent messaging. Right now, if you move from one place to another, you've got different haulers. That makes it very difficult. We have to continually educate people if they move from one community to another. With this, our goal is to get a consistent, here's what we can take in your recycling, whether you're in any of these 8 different communities. So that way we can start to work on habits. Habits are hard to change. This is one way that we can produce that without having to have people change their habits again and again and again. So the benefits, what's in this for everyone? People talked about wanting to have more regional collaboration. This is a very clear way to do that. There's potential for reduced costs and improved services. We can take advantage of economies of scale by pooling our efforts as well as our dollars. We have greater buyer power. When you've got, this municipality will have somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the population of the county banded together. When you do that, you have much greater buyer power. in working with haulers for both recycling or solid waste, if that's the way that this authority would like to move. Also, opportunity for optimized routes for hauling. You reduce your greenhouse gas emissions, you reduce the wear and tear on your roads, and you can decrease costs, which are passed from your hauler on to you. Lastly, there is an option to withdraw. So once members join the authority, there is a process which stipulates by which members can get out of the authority. Bob Davis will talk a little bit about that after me. So there is an opportunity to leave if the authority moves in a direction that council is not satisfied with it. If it no longer benefits you, you have an opportunity to get out. Additionally, there's an opportunity for other members surrounding the authority to be a customer, or even within the boundaries. We've had conversations with the universities early on in this process who would like to be involved with it somehow. So the universities are not municipalities. They can't be authority members. They don't get a vote, but they are engaged in the process and interested in the outcome and potentially a customer as this authority progresses. So with that, I'll introduce Bob Davis, who's our attorney. He has extensive experience with authorities, so I'll let him continue on.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. A couple of different issues before I get to the authority. Mr. Mirsky, you had excellent questions on the PFAS issue. Could I approach and just give him some information about a stewardship program that was developed where 8 major manufacturers in the United States stopped the manufacturing? And interestingly, a lot of the concern now is the stuff that is coming from other countries through the manufacturing process. But could I approach him just so he could have that article?
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
The second thing I would like to mention is that I am the outside counsel who briefed and argued with your attorneys the intervention process into the Gelman case to work with, to be in the case. And without divulging any non-disclosure agreements, I would advise you that your questions were very pointed and very accurate, and I can tell you those are some of the major issues that are being discussed. Your comments and concerns are directly on point. I was sitting back there wanting to jump up and tell you so many things about what's going on, including major conference call tomorrow morning on the issues. I just can't, but your questions are right on track. So good job on staying with that. The Constitution in Michigan, we have students here, right? So pay attention. The Constitution in Michigan, through its exact language and then down through its enabling laws, likes for groups of municipalities and entities to get together and do things as a group that could be done singularly, thinking that the economies and the benefits are better if you do things collectively. Garbage management, trash management, composting, recycling are one of those areas of municipal involvement where the government strongly believes that unified groups do better than singularly. So they do have their own enabling law on this topic, which means that 2 or more can get together and form a group legally and lawfully if they follow a certain process of developing articles of incorporation and then filing them right and making sure everybody certifies them and everybody agrees to them and they're all unanimous. And then you're on your way to being a lawful entity for the purposes of which you undertake. So we do have that enabling act, and by way of background, I have represented the South Oakland County Resource Recovery Authority since the year 2020, and we have 12 cities ranging from Berkeley down to Troy alphabetically, with unique characteristics, unique development patterns. Royal Oak is a lot different than Hazel Park, which is different than Clawson, and unique needs and unique developments. And that group has functioned in terms of waste collection, disposal, compost, and recycling over the years. When I joined in the year 2000 as their attorney, we were embarking on new contracts. And one of the things we did was we took the geographic boundary, which is about 75 square miles, about, I think it's about 290,000 citizens. And we came up with a mechanism for a new bid process wherein we got rid of the division lines between the communities, so a person could bid on a chunk, not a community, a geographic chunk, not a municipal boundary, so the truck didn't have to turn around every time it hit the end of the street, and we could have better routes. When we did that process and we went out for bids, we ended up with very discrete waste hauling contracts, and our rates went down by 16 to 24% across the board with the various communities. Thereafter, I led them into constructing a MRF in Troy at our existing transfer facility. I know Molly, I arranged for her to have a private tour of the MRF. Right? It was Molly Day at the MRF, and she saw the operations firsthand. And we did a big $4.5 million cart rollout where we rolled out carts with logos and we imprinted certain information on them. And since we have now 1 year of, a little over 1 year of data from our conversion to that process, and our recycling is up 27% across the board in the communities. There's no linear relationship between an increase in recycling and a decrease in the waste. It is somewhat related, but it's not a one-for-one. But we are doing a pretty good job on reducing our tonnage that is going to the landfill. We have an entity who operates and helps us at the MRF. We have a trucking company that trucks the materials out of the MRF and out of our transfer station. So we also constructed a very state-of-the-art compost facility. It's in Rochester. We haven't told Rochester it's there, but it's in Rochester. We haven't had one complaint in about 25 years. We bought all state-of-the-art equipment. We tumble and mix that stuff. And then we give it back to the communities, to the DPWs, and to the other maintenance organizations. That's our first priority, is to return the yard waste back to the community for community projects and development, and then we sell the rest. So when I developed the MRF and helped them develop the MRF, we developed the MRF in a fashion that when all of our waste would go, when all of our recyclables would go there, we would only be at 50% capacity. So if I took everything the 12 communities had, we'd be at 50% capacity. So now that a year has passed, we're going to market that availability, and that funding is going to return back to the member communities. So it is a system, and I only bring that up to show you that it is a system that works. We haven't had anyone leave. We haven't had anyone withdraw. We haven't had anyone not satisfied with what the authority has been able to achieve. When you look at the articles, you had great representation at all of our meetings, and it was difficult because I came in with articles that were this big and said, hey, the enabling law says we can do all these things. And now we're about here, which I knew we would probably do, because all the different members who are going to potentially get involved had different thinking, different thoughts. So if you look at what we're proposing here, we've defined very carefully what the purposes of this authority would be from its outset, and we actually defined very carefully what it will not do. And that was a big concern for many of the communities. Nobody wants to get involved in owning a landfill. It's just not prudent, probably not smart. Transfer stations, a little less risky, but maybe not within the appetite of some. MRF, I think, is a wonderful thing to have. Strategically located, it's my opinion, having worked on these issues for many years, that a strategically located MRF benefits the area as a whole. Ours sits right in Troy, which is 3/4 of the way up the southern Oakland County city chain, and it's just perfect location. The folks know it's there. The drop-off centers are surrounding it. The folks know where to go. We put out a great messaging. Everybody in the 12 communities, you could move from Birmingham to Troy, from Troy to Clawson, and the message on recycling is consistent. There's no confusion. There's no discrepancy on what's recyclable. There's no confusion on the carts. There's no confusion on what goes in and what doesn't go in, and it really works well. It really works well. So the other things that came up during the course of negotiating and talking about these articles was the idea that voting under the proposed format we're suggesting, each community, one vote. Majority vote on most issues, certain expenditures, 2/3, certain expenditures, back to the community's legislative body before it can be approved by the board. So each community would have a representative. This community would designate a delegate, a representative to the board. So if we had 8 communities involved, we'd have 8 board members. And they would function as a board and make decisions with respect to the authority. Each community would have a certain buy-in of $5,000 to get things rolling. And I bring Evan along with me wherever I go, because he promised that he would match everybody's $5,000. So I don't let him drift far from the meetings. So everybody would have 5 in, everybody would get a 5 match. That would happen for a couple of years. And the articles would be in place. We also put in a budget process, which is actually not in my other articles, but so that you would know, the communities would know it in advance. What is the authority thinking of doing next year? And are we still on board? Are they still headed in a direction that we like? We're going to see the budget. Where is the money going to go? What are we planning on doing? And then there's going to be a yearly activity report. What did we do? I think the city would want to know, since we became part of this authority, are the recyclables up or are they down? Are they flat? Is the quality increasing? Are the people getting the message? Is the message consistent? And how are we doing? So there would be a yearly activity report. There would be an annual audit process. We have a mechanism in here for insufficient income. If we had a budget and we somehow went over it, how that gets handled and how it has to go back to the legislative bodies to be examined, and how the costs would be allocated. There is a withdrawal process, and let me tell you why that reads so unlike my writing style. Because you read these articles and you say, well, Bob Davis was working on all that. Whoa, he didn't write that part. And then you see I wrote the rest of it, and then you say, oh, he didn't write that part. There's 2 parts in here that are required by law. In 2001, Madison Heights wanted to exit from the soccer organization. The law never had an exit provision. They didn't think people apparently were going to leave or dissolve. So through some legislative connections and despite pending litigation, I was in a courtroom trying to get this resolved, and Madison Heights was in Lansing getting new legislation. And so now everybody who forms an authority going forward under this act has to include the dissolution language and the withdrawal language, most of which makes no sense to what we're doing, because it talks about environmental liabilities, it talks about your fair share of the landfill costs, it talks about tonnages of waste that went to the landfill over the last, it makes no sense, but there it is, and I have to put it in, even though it doesn't apply. So what we did in these articles is we tried to go around those mandatory provisions with all the other things that we inserted, including the budgeting, the audit process, the way we handle finances, and the other voting structures. So the articles were very well worked on, and again, you had excellent representation at all the meetings. It took us 3 meetings to come up with those acronyms. It was difficult to name the thing. And we've been going community to community now with this kind of a non-action presentation. There's no action on these yet. But when it is time, we have to everyone has to agree to the same articles, or we have to start over. So we're trying to introduce them to you at this juncture. So let's just, last thing, let's picture the first meeting. Let's say we take Mr. Needham and he somehow ends up being the delegate representative to this authority board. I'm not saying you are, let's just use an example. So now we have 8 people. We envision that the first 2 to 3 meetings of the authority would be, let's look at everyone's existing recycling contracts. How does it fit into your current waste hauling arrangements? When could it be renewed? When does it have to stay in place under a current contract arrangement? What are you paying for the recycling services, or how's that working financially? And we want to get all 8 people analyzed. I have already successfully worked with several of the communities who may be joining this authority and their contractors to say, if so-and-so joins this authority, can I remove from their existing contractual relationship their recycling portion of the contract? And I've been successful with that endeavor. So then we would know where everyone's contract is. Then we would start working on our messaging and our communication about recycling, with the end goal, I think, being in about 3 to 4 years. We have to be realistic. We're in the tank right now on recyclables financially. I suggest to you it's going to rebound within that time frame. And where we want to emerge 3 to 4 years from now is a group of 8 communities, 10 communities, however many communities, who have a market reputation of high quality, high quantity recyclables, who are in the business of producing high quality, high valuable, highly sought recyclables, so that we can get 1 or 2 private entities to manage those recyclables at good rates. Having a local MRF, fantastic. I get paid by the word and I'm done.
So you said you have not yet started the process of going before the actual municipal
No, we
bodies.
have, but only, we haven't been an action item yet on anyone's
When
agenda.
do you expect that to start?
The next round. We did 4 communities this week.
Okay, because we do have a resolution
Yes, you
before
do.
us.
You do. You're the first.
And we're just advisory. but
Right,
yeah.
and eventually you have to go to your legislative body
Right.
to get the action. We had a meeting the other night where there was a recommendation to send it to the next level. We're getting positive recommendations wherever we go, but eventually I have to go to the legislative body of each entity and get the same articles drafted, which, when you have 12, it's very interesting, because one change, you do 11, and the last person wants a change, you got to do the 11 again. So we always start with Birmingham, because I know they're going to change something.
So how
That's why
many,
you're starting with Ann Arbor.
And I know, I'm pretty sure I have to start with the city of Ann Arbor.
So joining the authority, if the city council did decide to do so, would commit them to everything in the articles. Is that accurate?
The articles govern the entity that is formed. There would be a separate legal entity known as the WARMA. And they would have, as designated in here, a representative to that authority. And the authority would be bound by the articles, and yes, down through would be the community as operating under the articles. And that's why, Mr. Neem, that's a great question, because that's why, if you go to page, I don't know if you have a draft, but if you go to page 2, that was why there was way more time than I ever thought under Article 3, what would be the purposes, and more importantly, that one sentence, what would not be the purpose. And the not purpose took a long, it was a very well thought out exclusion. John, I actually knew you were going to have a question.
So I don't know if Theo passed on the email that I sent him last night.
No.
I have specific questions about that, if I may. And I unfortunately didn't print out a copy, so I'm doing this from memory. But I'll quote from the Articles of Incorporation. One concern that I have that I think a lot of other commissioners would have, that it states, for the purpose of these articles, materials management shall mean the management including the collection of municipal solid waste, yard waste, and recyclables. I'm wondering why the term yard waste was used and not organics, because organics is, let's put it the other way around. Yard waste is a subset of organics.
Agreed.
And if we're excluding things like food waste and fogs and things like that, I would have a concern with that. And so I'm wondering, was that an oversight, or was that something that was done on purpose? That's the first question.
A, it was done on purpose. B, you're correct.
Uh-huh.
And C, most current contracts use yard waste. I believe even yours does, to some degree. And I agree with you, it's not the proper term anymore. But if you look at bidding processes going on all across Oakland, Macomb, Washington, they bid on 3 things: the municipal solid waste, yard waste, and recyclables.
So does yard waste preclude?
No, I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with that thought.
So I mean, I'd hate for somebody to come back and say, this is the Articles of Incorporation, yard waste is a subset of organics.
You're
It
only
says
bound to
yard
yard
waste,
waste,
we're not
yeah.
going to do.
That was not the intent. That was not the intent, but I agree with your comment.
So can we change it?
We're here first.
So consider it. So the second clarification I would
It's
ask.
actually a very good
So
observation. but
these were posted, by the way, on Legistar, so I took a look at them last night. It's, right after that, it says, the ownership, this is what you talked about, the ownership, the following shall not be authorized purpose of WARMA as the effective date of these articles. The ownership or purchase of any real property and/or any facility used in the past or the future for the disposal of municipal solid waste by permit or otherwise. Again, I take solid waste to be the overarching term.
Yes.
And the other aspects like recyclables, organics, et cetera, to be subset of solid waste. Is that
Right.
correct?
Correct.
So this would preclude the authority from owning or purchasing any facility, meaning a drop-off station, a MRF,
No.
a
Disposal.
disposal.
Disposal is a defined word in the law.
Okay,
Trans-
only
like-
for the disposal, not for the collection of them.
Correct.
Okay,
And not for the transfer, and not
Okay.
for the MRF management.
excellent, okay, okay.
Yeah, perfect question, though, because,
Yeah.
you know, when you look at the TSDF acronym, disposal has a unique legal connotation of disposal, includes incineration.
Okay,
Right.
good. I think we don't have a problem with that. I obviously misread it. So the other question that I had relates to a document that was posted called Collaborative Contracting Process. This is not a part of the Articles of Incorporation, but I'm nevertheless concerned with it here because it is in writing, and it says that there's a part called Hauler Determination. Authority contracts with hauler. Members who opt in agree upon a single hauler to contract with. Is that the direction of the authority? I mean, what that implies is that the only way we're going to do hauling is by having a single
No.
contract hauler.
And I apologize, I'm not sure what document.
But that's, it's posted to Legislar and it's titled, I just have to read it again, I have to scroll up. Collaborative Contracting Process.
Oh, this example
Yeah.
sheet, yeah.
I can take that. So this was mostly for demonstration to show that
Yeah.
it was an opt-in or an opt-out process. We had one.
So we're not
community-
binding anybody
No.
or ourselves to
No.
only having one contract. If it came that
No.
it makes more sense to contract with 2 entities or 3 entities, we
Yes.
could do that.
In fact,
Good.
that's how they have it. at
You know,
Southern.
Mr. Murphy, and that's a great question, because when, okay, you can sit down, I'm on
you
camera.
got it.
He gets paid more that way.
Right, so when I was going to all the communities on the other one, everyone had the same thought. Here's this lawyer, you know, he's just trying to steer everything towards waste management or some big corporation to bundle up 12 communities worth of nice consolidated, you know, the waste haulers, they love it when you're dense and you're close by and a lot of rooftops and, you know, they're gonna get a lot of business. And I always had it just the opposite in my head. They gave me far too much credit for thinking beyond my means. So what did we end up with? And I knew how I thought it would go. Everything got bundled, there were no boundaries. So Mr. Mirsky owns ABC Trucking. He could say, I'm putting in we went out for bids, I'm putting in a bid for this box. You know, part of it was Troy, and I only want to do municipal solid waste. I don't want anything to do with organics, and I don't want anything to do with recyclables. I just want to bid on that part. So that got matrixed in. You're now in as a bidder on that part. And when we got all done and collated, Birmingham and several of the communities right near Birmingham, our entire contract is with Car Trucking. Have you heard of them?
No, I'm not.
I'm glad. Car Trucking. They have one of the most valuable pieces of my organization's business. And it is a big money contracts. And they're fantastic. And the rates are, so then if you go south and you're in the Troy area and some of those communities, we have Tringali Sanitation. Have you heard of them?
No.
Right? So that's how it ended up. And there was never the intent here to have, I think that was produced as an example.
Okay.
And that was our intent here, and that would be our intent with this organization.
I have one other request, just to keep it short, and that is, I think all of us would be interested in rough timelines. I mean, the two of you sort of laid out some rough timelines, but like, what is a timeline if the authority is formed between the creation of it and the target date for educational and engagement and outreach materials? What is a timeline for a MRF? What is a timeline for this? So we have at least some sense of that, because we're updating our solid resource management plan, and we're supposed to lay out what we want to do over the next 5 years. And I think it's an important input to have at least some sense of what timelines the WARMA has compared to what we're thinking about doing here in Ann Arbor.
Okay. I could get you something on that.
You can give it to
quickly.
Missy, and then she can distribute it to all of us.
Yeah, I was involved in the area of renegotiating the host community agreement between your landfill and the county. So I had some peripheral involvement in your county solid waste management planning process most recently. But I can assure you this, the approach we want to take is fairly aggressive.
Good.
You know, we want to It's a great time. I think, you know, realistically, you're going to see contractors approaching communities, and it's already happening where I live in Macomb County, that they're trying to reopen contracts to force the communities to pay them for recycling.
Come again? Say that again.
Yeah, and I was careful with my wording there. I think I got it right. Contractors in some communities are asking the communities to reopen their existing contracts, which have recycling services, to require the communities to now pay the contractors. You know, because there's no more benefit to the end products right now in the marketplace.
So the income from the end product of recycled is not earning enough money to cover their costs?
Because the commodity markets are so.
Correct.
So in the tank.
Yeah, got it.
And unfortunately, it's a bad signal.
Yeah.
It's a bad signal to the end people we're trying to really work with here, the citizens, when you have to say, you know, we all want to be on board with recycling, but there's a fee associated with it.
Yep.
It's terrible. That's a terrible outcome.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry.
A couple of questions. One is, when you say entity, what does that really mean in terms of membership? Is that a city? Is that a township? What does that mean in terms of having a seat at the table?
Yes, a municipality.
Municipality?
Yes.
Okay. And then why is it one per entity? If Ann Arbor is 5 times the size of Dexter, then why do we get one and they get one?
One representative.
One representative.
And one vote.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way the group put it together. The way it morphs, it usually starts like that. The way the other one I work on, it morphed into tonnage. He with the most tonnage got the most votes.
Mm-hmm.
So when Troy casts a vote, even though they have one representative there, because you don't want to, you don't want to get into weighting how many people are
Yeah,
at
right.
meetings.
Right.
So they have one representative there, but when they vote, their vote carries with it the last 3 years' average tonnage in comparison to the group as a whole. So even the quorum is formed by the weight. But we don't have that yet because we don't have any weight.
Right.
We don't have that yet because we don't collect anything. We don't have that yet. But eventually, the amendments are the articles are subject to an amendment process. And for example, and just to go the other route on that conversation, some of the smaller communities have said, you know, if let's say we were going to get together on a messaging campaign that costs money, why, and it's going to produce something, even though I know we're paperless, let's just pretend it's going to produce a pamphlet. And the city of Ann Arbor might need more pamphlets, right, than Ann Arbor Township. So would Ann Arbor Township have to pay for, you know, 1/8 of the pamphlets, or some prorated, and we left that open to handle on a case-by-case basis while we're starting here. So it works in both directions, yeah. But you would be amending your articles as that became necessary.
Got it. Thanks. I know, right?
Other questions?
We need this
I know.
side.
Yeah, I was just going to ask the same thing, and I think that really needs to be looked at. You know, when you were comparing it to Oakland County, where there's more similarities across communities than there is within Washington.
You have some real differences here.
So I'm glad to hear that there's an amendment process, but
Yes.
that may need to be attended to before
The
amendment process.
We and your representative talked about that a lot. And you had Matt, an attorney who was at a lot of our final stage meetings, who I found to be very, very helpful.
And then the other question, I mean, I'm generally supportive of the regional approach, but at one point in your presentation, you mentioned you believe that the markets are going to change. And I'm wondering what's in your crystal ball?
I got nothing.
Okay.
I got nothing, but if you look back historically, this cycle, this is not our first down cycle. So I think the materials are going to return to value. Now, I can tell you this, because of some of the efforts made over a long period of time with these communities, our prices haven't dipped as much as others. We have really clean recyclables. And you should be asking, Susan's going to ask this question. She's going to say, what happens if, so-and-so communities' recyclables are not so good, and now they're commingled with ours into one contract, and we all know that the city of Ann Arbor would be the best, right? Number one, almost this year. So you would say that'd be a great question. So now I've got, you guys have your community totally on board. You got the best darn recyclable, and one of the other communities keeps muddling it up with their, and that's why, the group has to function as a whole, and we have to have a consistent approach to recyclables across the authority as a whole. I don't have that happening. We don't have any black sheep in the group of 12, and we're doing very well. We're still doing very well on our recycling, and we're returning money to the communities.
How long do you expect the process to get an approval and put the thing
Next
in?
5 minutes.
That'd be good.
Yeah. No, I think realistically, Mr. Graham, I think if we were sitting down for our first board meeting in April or May, I would be very pleased.
I would too.
I'd be very pleased.
Speed ahead.
But I got a lot of legislative, and there's different meeting dates, and you know how it goes. You know how it goes.
Have city lawyers had a chance to look at this as well?
Yeah.
And are they recommending that we move forward with this?
I think,
I don't think they do that, but they would say no red flags.
I know this young man is always at the meetings.
Yes. Matt Rechtine from the Attorney's Office, is who Bob referred to as part of actually putting the articles together.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
very
So
helpful.
they've been right at the table.
I'm no lawyer.
Yep.
so-
Yep.
And everybody raised good points.
Other
Anyways,
questions?
that's, any other questions? I can respond in writing. The one question I'm going to respond in writing was a more defined timeline. But it's a great group.
And if we could follow up on Mr. Mirsky's point about organics too, I think.
Yes.
That would be helpful. So we don't have a sponsor on the commission, but there is a resolution before us that I'll just read the resolve clauses of. Resolved that the Environmental Commission is supportive of the city participating in a regional approach to materials management strategies, and resolved that the Environmental Commission recommends that the city of Ann Arbor becomes a constituent member of WRRMA. Is there a motion to
So
approve?
moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks for your time.
Your time is very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Our final item of new business is a resolution that Councilmember Bannister is bringing before us today, support for Strong Clean Water Act and Strong Clean Water Rule.
Yes. About 2 weeks ago, we got an email, Councilmember Smith and I, from Jason Frenzel and Meredith Gillies, and they were suggesting to us that we consider a resolution opposing Trump's dirty water rules as of late. And so I really want to thank Dr. Stoltz for swinging into action amongst all her other responsibilities. She took the ball, ran with it, and prepared us a draft resolution. And then, late this afternoon, Meredith Gillies sent us a template from the Clean Water Action National Team. And so there, and again, Dr. Stoltz's team swung into action and integrated the two resolutions. So what we have here, just in case you didn't get a chance to study it yet, was that the current Trump administration is looking to revise the definition of waters of the United States, and this could affect 18% of our streams and half of our nation's wetlands, with a proposed rollback on the definition. And so the resolution is resolved that we would preserve the definition of the waters of the United States, and that we would ask or urge City Council to direct our lobbying efforts in Lansing and at the federal level to support the old 2015 definitions of waters of the United States, and urge them to work to revoke the proposed rollback.
Is there a second for the resolution?
Second.
Commissioner Green? Any discussion?
So we're asking POTUS to preserve WOTUS. I think I got that right?
Oh, gosh.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Very good.
Thank you, Councilmember. One quick thing before we move on to reports. I have to apologize. Early in the meeting, I skipped completely over approval of the minutes from our December meeting, I realized. They were posted to Legistar. Does anyone have any additions or corrections?
They actually are not.
They weren't posted?
I think I submitted some corrections to Emily. There's some name misspellings from public speakers. I
So-
think that was
From
it, but-
when Emily sent it out a long time ago. It's not on Legislature.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
I knew I saw them.
Yeah, I feel like it was
So,
But
yeah,
nothing
I
up
remember
there.
getting a message from her.
There is something on Legistar, but I
It's not,
but I
yeah,
don't know
it
if it was
says minutes haven't been posted yet or approved
I
yet.
thought the link on the agenda worked.
I didn't either.
I got them through the link.
And that
Yeah.
I don't know if it's been corrected.
authority document wasn't on Legistar either, just the resolution.
John, you mean the one that posted yesterday? That you looked at and that was where you wanted comments or edits?
yeah, I think it was the one that was
Emily.
posted yesterday.
Email from Emily.
Draft minutes from 12/6. Yeah,
Emily.
I mean, I don't remember off the top of my head what I sent, but I know there's misspellings of this, of
Okay.
the speakers.
So we should hold off till next time, probably, and get those addressed, right?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. All right. Report from any committees. Any of our subcommittees have reports? We don't have any. Commissions. Commissioner Gabrandel, do you want to have anything from planning?
We weren't that busy, given the holidays, in terms of the things that we reviewed, more medical marijuana, other things that didn't have anything to do with, not much relation. Worked on the capital improvements plan. So, and there was some discussion, which Missy's probably been involved with, in terms of weighting and sustainability, that will probably get worked out in the next year, as it relates to us. But not anything that interesting.
Commissioner Mursky, anything from energy?
A couple things from energy. First of all, last meeting, we had a presentation on, from a University of Michigan student on recycling or reuse of urine. Actually pretty interesting. Has positive climate benefits and a bunch of other benefits, and I recommended that, and the student agreed that he'd be willing to present it here in the Environmental Commission, so I won't get any details. It'll be posted on Legistar. I made a presentation on what our sister city Tübingen, Germany is doing in terms of climate action, and anybody that's interested, I can provide them that or talk to them. And then we're considering a solar access ordinance draft, because there have been cases where people have invested money in solar installations to have then someone erect a building or some other structure that then shades their solar installation. So we're looking into that. And the only last thing that I wanted to mention, as what I think is a good practice for the Environmental Commission to consider, what the Energy Commission has done is we meet on Tuesday evenings, and so that same time slot is reserved every Tuesday evening for a different subcommittee. So we've formed 5 different subcommittees, and we're working on a lighting ordinance, on an EV-ready ordinance, on a on a home energy score at the time of marketing ordinance. So an audit would be done, and a home energy score would be generated, and that would have to be posted on the MLS at the time of marketing. We're working on a community engagement group, and I left out one, but it's not all that important. What I think is important is we've split up into these groups. We have commissioners, and in some cases, volunteers from the community serving on those. And I think the Environmental Commission could get a lot more done if it took the same approach. For example, there could be a natural features subcommittee led by Mr. Graham here to my right. There could be one on, for example, clean water or watershed health, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's something that the commission as a whole should consider going forward. That's all.
That's something we can talk about at our next meeting. I think that would fit right in.
Yep, perfect.
Commissioner Phil?
Pickleball. Pickleball? Yeah, everybody loves it. Lots of new stripes on the courts. Great season at the canoe liveries.
Councilmember Bannister, do you have any report from council?
Just a small one from Councilmember Hayner. He said he met with the Policy Agenda Committee meeting yesterday, the Policy Agenda meeting, and he wanted me to share the good news with you all that as a policy, we are going to, as a city, be pushing the state of Michigan in a lot of different ways to allow municipalities to have more strict environmental rules than the federal, than the state.
The only thing I had to mention was Commissioner Josh Rigo has moved out of state and resigned from the commission. So if anyone knows anyone who would be a good addition, I encourage them to apply. Dr. Stoltz, do you?
Oh, Bob, and I just wanted to wave in the back. One of our applicants has joined us tonight. Back in the back row in the green turtleneck is Rita Mitchell, and she is one of our candidates for Josh's seat. Thanks for coming,
Welcome.
Rita.
Thank you.
Dr. Stoltz, did you have a staff report?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief, as I know we're pretty late in the night. Some fun things to let you know about. We have given out 2 grants through the Sustaining Ann Arbor Together grant program. And I feel like I need to say thank you to Susan, because this is your brainchild. I know we've borrowed pretty extensively from Seattle on this, and I remember being on the commission thinking through this with you. So thank you for your leadership in this initiative. Yeah. Next week, we're going to do a press event. I think Councilmember Bannister is going to join us. Ann Arbor STEAM at Northside is a recipient of a solar curriculum for K-8 education. So we're going to go out and try to get some press with some students and generate some support for that. And then there'll be a press release coming in a little while about Leslie Science and Nature Center has developed a nature-based playscape, which is super cool, and I'm happy to share any of the renderings, but it looks fabulous. And so we're helping support that project, making it ADA compliant so every kid, regardless of ability, is able to participate in that space. We're pretty excited. We also are working on a grant for aging in place efficiently. And it's a match with a local foundation and a national foundation. And this is about, as we age as a population, making sure people can stay in their homes. And I know we talked about this earlier in July or September or sometime in that space, that was an area we're focusing on. We just found out today that we are part of a peer exchange around resilience hubs. So I think you know that's an area we're really interested in. So 5 cities have received some funding to sit down together and develop our work plan around that. So that's pretty exciting. Thanks to John Mirsky, Chief Kennedy, and Howard's leadership here, we are moving forward with a volunteer solar program following the IPSI model, for those who may know. This is an opportunity to install solar at a much cheaper rate, because so much of the cost of solar is actually in labor, and so we're going to try to test that. Stay tuned for more. And then the last thing I just want to do is a shout out to the city administrator, that right before the holiday he gave, I would say, me a gift, and probably a curse to everyone else, in that we are going to update our environmentally preferable purchasing policy over time to exclude all single-use plastics within the city. We can't do it externally for outside, but within city operations we can, as well as styrofoam and some other compounds. So thank you to the city administrator for that leadership, and we are working to educate all staff and to make that move following our county peers. Maybe I'll stop there.
That's great. Really good news. Our next meeting in February will largely deal with a brainstorm session on things that we want to tackle for the rest of the year. But if anyone has anything else that they want to address at the next meeting, please let Dr. Stoltz and I know, and we'll try to accommodate that. The next scheduled meeting is February 28th, 7 p.m. here, I think. And with that, we come to our final opportunity for public comment. Any members of the public like to address the commission at this point? Okay. Any final words from any commissioners? All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.